They found the folder buried deep beneath rusting cabinets in an old tunnel inside Sydney's Garden Island Naval Base, sealed in waxed canvas, bound with fading green cord, and stamped in letters that still carried the dread of wartime secrecy. Z Special Unit, Most Secret Operation Jaywick. Someone decades ago had scrawled a second line beneath the classification, a line that read like a warning and an epitaph. 14 men, 1 fishing boat, 2,700 miles, no rescue planned. The file smelled of salt, smoke, and mildew, the remains of a mission that stretched across the longest distances and the deepest shadows of the Second World War. Its pages recorded something few believed possible. A group of civilians turned commandos who sailed straight into the Japanese-held fortress of Singapore, infiltrated the enemy's most secure harbor, and crippled its ships using nothing more than stealth, nerve, and homemade limpet mines. It was an operation so unlikely, so quietly executed that even Allied commanders struggled to believe it when the first decoded signals came through. What happened in September 1943 remains one of the most improbable covert successes of the war. This is the story of Operation Jaywick. To understand the mission, one has to understand the darkness in which it was conceived. By 1943, the Second World War had already ground through continents. The Pacific Ocean was aflame. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 had been the greatest British military defeat in modern history. More than 80,000 Allied troops surrendered when the island fortress fell to Japanese forces. The entire region collapsed in shock. The humiliation was immense. Japan now controlled the shipping lanes across Southeast Asia, transporting oil, rubber, tin, bauxite, and strategic materials to fuel its war machine. Singapore's Keppel Harbor became one of the most heavily guarded ports in the Empire of the Rising Sun. Surrounded by naval patrols, coastal guns, minefields, searchlights, airfields, and radar outposts. No Allied warship could approach it. No submarine could get close. No aircraft could penetrate its defenses without catastrophic losses. Allied High Command considered sabotage impossible, but a handful of men believed otherwise. The idea came from a British officer with an Australian passport, Major Ivan Lyon. Young, ambitious, and unorthodox, Lyon had escaped capture in 1942 and found himself assigned to the Allied clandestine warfare group known as Special Operations Australia, or Z Special Unit, a covert force specializing in irregular warfare, covert insertion, and sabotage behind enemy lines. Lyon proposed something audacious, something bordering on madness. He wanted to take a small, civilian-looking fishing boat, disguise it as a local merchant vessel, fill it with a team of saboteurs, and sail it thousands of miles through Japanese-controlled waters, passing Nipponese patrol ships, flying under the radar of coastal watchtowers and slipping day after day into enemy shipping lanes. Their destination would be Singapore Harbor. Their objective would be simple to describe and nearly impossible to achieve. Sink as many enemy ships as possible without firing a shot. He believed it could be done with stealth, deception, and a tiny group of determined men. Z Special Unit tested Lyon's idea. Military planners dismissed it. Naval officers called it suicide. But the mission's architect persisted. He was joined by another legend in the making, Captain Bill Reynolds, an American civilian whose Chinese riverboat experience made him one of the best coastal navigators in the region. Reynolds had an asset no one else did, a Japanese-style fishing boat 70 feet long, weathered, unremarkable, perfect for blending into the archipelagos of Southeast Asia. Her name was Crate. Built as a coastal trader, she was slow, uncomfortable, and barely seaworthy for deep ocean travel. But she was exactly the kind of vessel Japanese patrols would ignore. The boat was disguised further, given fake identity papers, tar black hull paint, bamboo mats, fishing nets, and all the markings of an innocuous Southeast Asian cargo ship. Next came the men. 14 volunteers, some British, mostly Australian, a few civilians. All trained in sabotage, silent killing, small craft work, radio operation, and underwater demolition. These men were not special forces in the modern sense. They were simply volunteers asked to risk everything on a plan that seemed more fiction than strategy. They were given false names, false identities, and the knowledge that capture meant torture and execution. There would be no help if things went wrong. No second wave. No extraction team. If the mission failed, the crate would likely be sunk and her crew erased quietly. Everything depended on stealth. Everything depended on anonymity. On 2nd September 1943, the crate slipped out of Exmouth Gulf, Western Australia, under a false flag. Her engines coughed. Her hull creaked. Her water tanks were barely enough for the journey. The men aboard wore sarongs, painted their skin darker to blend with local fishermen, and moved with practiced nonchalance whenever Japanese planes buzzed overhead. The voyage was relentless. Days of heat, nights of rain, constant fear of interception. The crate passed through the Flores Sea, weaving among islands, hugging coastlines, slipping through enemy patrol zones using knowledge of local shipping routes. Japanese destroyers moved in and out of view. Seaplanes passed within sight. Patrol craft scanned the waters. But the fishing vessel, broken, slow, and unimpressive, attracted no suspicion. The men slept in shifts beneath mosquito nets, sweating through nights that felt like wet blankets. Weapons were hidden beneath sacks of rice. Mines were concealed in water barrels. Every move was calculated to avoid detection. Weeks passed. Finally, on 18th of September 1943, the crate reached the waters near Singapore, one of the most fortified maritime zones on Earth. Patrol vessels crisscrossed the sea lanes. Merchant ships formed long convoys. Radar stations on Blakang Mati Island scanned the horizon. Lion and his men prepared their next move. 6 members of the team were designated for the actual harbor infiltration. They assembled their folding kayaks, small 2-man craft known as fold boats. These craft were collapsible, silent, and nearly invisible at night, ideal for slipping past enemy vessels. On 20th of September, the men left the crate, paddling toward enemy shores. Their route took them through backwaters, mangrove swamps, and narrow straits patrolled by Japanese sentries. The humidity was suffocating. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. Patrol boats passed within meters. A single splash or glint of moonlight could have exposed them, but they moved like shadows. As the nights passed, the kayak team scouted Singapore harbor, mapping ship positions, patrol patterns, and anchor points. They returned each dawn to hidden camps on deserted islands, sleeping beneath jungle canopy, careful to leave no trace. The operation reached its climax on night of 26 September 1943. The raiders, led by Lion and Donald Davidson, paddled silently into Keppel Harbor, entering through the main shipping channel under cover of darkness. The harbor lights glowed faintly through the humidity. Japanese merchant vessels lay anchored in rows, guarded by sentries and floating patrols. The kayaks split up. Each carried several limpet mines, magnetic devices that clung to steel hulls and detonated with a delayed fuse. The men moved from ship to ship, their hands steady, their clothes soaked in sweat, their bodies aching from the paddle. One by one, they fixed the mines below the waterline. No alarms were raised, no sentries saw them. They slipped away into darkness. Hours later, just before dawn, Singapore harbor erupted in thunder. Explosions rolled across the water. Fire and fuel washed against the docks. Japanese ships shuddered, rolled, burned, and capsized. 7 major vessels were crippled or sunk. Other ships were damaged. Port operations ground to a standstill. The Japanese were stunned. They suspected Chinese resistance groups. They suspected British agents hiding in the local population. They suspected internal sabotage. But they never suspected the truth, that 14 men had sailed 2,700 miles from Australia to carry out the attack. The kayaks returned to their hideouts. The men reassembled, and in early October the crate slipped back into the sea. Quietly, slowly, blending once more into the fishing lanes. The return journey was just as dangerous as the approach. Patrol ships now searched aggressively. Word of sabotage had spread. Japanese commanders suspected a group of Allied infiltrators were at large. Air patrols intensified. Yet the crate remained unnoticed. On 19 October 1943, after 48 days at sea, the battered vessel limped back into Exmouth Gulf. The men climbed ashore, thin, exhausted, sunburned, but alive. Their mission had succeeded beyond expectation. The file records no heroic flourish, no grand proclamation, only a dry intelligence summary. Operation Jaywick, successful sabotage of enemy shipping at Singapore. 7 ships sunk or crippled, no Allied casualties. Enemy remains unaware of origin of attack. What the file does not say is equally important. Jaywick proved something the Japanese never believed possible, that Allied forces could reach deep inside their fortified empire and strike without warning. It marked the beginning of a new phase of covert operations across Southeast Asia. It set the template for maritime special operations and the future special boat service. But it also had tragic consequences. In the aftermath, the Japanese conducted mass arrests among the civilian population of Singapore. Dozens of suspected saboteurs, most innocent, were interrogated, tortured, or executed. The raiders carried the weight of this knowledge for the rest of their lives. Jaywick was repeated once. The follow-up mission, Operation Rimau, ended in disaster. The Commandos were captured and executed. But Jaywick itself stands alone, quiet, improbable, daring to the edge of madness. 14 civilians and commandos in a disguised fishing boat, a voyage of 2,700 miles across enemy waters, a harbor full of Axis ships destroyed without a single detection. It remains one of the most extraordinary maritime raids in the history of the Second World War. The men who sailed the crate returned to secrecy, to silence, to anonymity. Their mission stayed classified long after victory in the Pacific. Their names disappeared from wartime headlines. Their deeds became the quiet legacy of a forgotten drawer in a naval tunnel. But the story endures. Because in a war filled with fleets, armies, and vast machines of destruction, sometimes the course of events shifts because of a handful of men in a fragile wooden boat, moving through darkness, trusting only in courage, ingenuity, and a willingness to attempt the impossible.